Hello everybody, this is Ohio Dan back with another random thought video. I wanted to just quickly go over my thoughts on the daylight savings time change because I think that I have a perspective that's a little bit different than what most people have. When you talk to a lot of people about daylight savings versus standard time, you'll get the response that there's no reason for the time change because the 24-hour day is just as long. The amount of daylight that we have is just as long, regardless of what the time is. And people will say that they hate having to change the clocks back one way or the other. And I used to agree that that was sufficient reason for getting rid of daylight savings time or standard time. But I want to go through a little bit of a thought experiment here because there are actual consequences to getting rid of the time change one way or the other, either getting rid of standard time or daylight savings time. So in the summer, we are on daylight savings time. Now, if we instead didn't switch over and just stayed on standard time, the amount of daylight or in the evening would get to the point where a lot of places would be dark by 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the evening. So you would lose all these long summer evenings if you weren't on daylight savings time. If you switch that around, though, and you look at where we would be if we only kept daylight savings time during the winter, during the time that we're coming up on in December and January, when we have the shortest days, it would be dark still at like 8 or 8:30 in the morning in a lot of places, because without switching back to standard time, we wouldn't have that earlier daylight in the morning. And the end result would be that basically it would be dark when you get up or when you go to work or whatever the case may be. So, unless you're willing to accept one of those consequences, one of those outcomes, you probably shouldn't get rid of the daylight savings time, or specifically the time change going back and forth from one to the other every March and November, unless you're willing to accept either shorter summer evenings or days in the winter where the sun doesn't come up till 8 or 8:30. I guess if I had to choose between one of those two things, I would choose to, get rid of standard time, since that would be easier. But like I say, it would be dark in the morning during the winter. And, the other choice is to make it to where we don't have the long evenings with daylight in the summertime. So I just thought I would kind of explain that logically, kind of go through the natural consequences of what we'd have if we get rid of one time or the other. So it's not as simple, to me at least, as saying that we should only have standard time or daylight savings because the time of day is always, or the length of the day is going to be what it's going to be. It's the same regardless of what time it says on the clock. All that's true, and I don't buy the idea that it saves electricity, that it creates a more efficient system for using power in areas that have daylight savings and standard time. But all that being said, there are consequences to getting rid of one or the other. So, if you have the position of we need to get rid of daylight savings time or standard time, one or the other, then you're going to have to deal with shorter summer evenings or mornings that are dark during the wintertime. And I've also noticed that the states that all of the states except for Hawaii and Arizona actually have the time change. But if you notice, the states that don't have it anymore or used to not have it, as far as having daylight savings time, they're on the western side of their time zone, or they straddle a division between one time zone and another. So Indiana, up until a few years ago, didn't have daylight savings time. Arizona is one of the only states left that doesn't have daylight savings time. So they're kind of in between, where you would have the longer summer evenings versus the darker mornings in the wintertime. In other words, they're a half hour off basically. And so they don't really have the same consequences that most areas do as far as not being right between one time zone and another. So I just thought, that's something that people don't seem to think out completely. So let me know what you guys think if you watch this video. I know it has nothing to do with anything in particular, but I wanted to talk about how, you know, if you get rid of one or the other, as far as daylight savings time or standard time, there are still consequences to that, and it's not as simple as saying we should just be on the same time and never move our clocks forward or backward, because there is an actual compromise that you have to have one way or the other on that.